From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The Chinese mainland has criticized Taiwan regional leader Lai Ching-te's so-called inauguration speech on Monday for his thinly veiled secessionist-minded speech. Let me repeat, it is a thinly veiled secessionist-minded speech given by Lai Ching-te. Thereover, you see the State Council Taiwan office's spokesperson Chen Binghua said the new leader of Taiwan has sent a quote-unquote dangerous signal of seeking Taiwan independence, which is incompatible with peace across the Taiwan Strait. Now, on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's foreign ministers meeting in Astana, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also says that no matter how the political situation in Taiwan changes, it will not change the historical and legal facts that there is only one China, and Taiwan is part of the People's Republic of China. Now, for more on the cross-Strait dynamics, we'll have with us in our Beijing studio Yang Xiyu, Senior Research Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. And in Shanghai, we have Josef Mahoney, Professor of Politics and International Relations at East China Normal University. Let me go to you first, Professor Yang. So good to see you again and to talk about this very important question of Taiwan. People outside the Chinese mainland or Taiwan doesn't know too much about the historical and legal part of it, whereby there are only, 12 countries in the world that recognize so-called Taiwan as a sovereign state, whereby there are over 180 countries recognize the government led by Beijing as the sole legitimate representative of all of China, and also the International Olympic Committee, the United Nations. What do you make of Lai Ching-te's speech, which is considered to be a thinly veiled, secessionist-minded speech?
Well, I think his speech really sent a very dangerous, but to some degree as an ambiguous signal. Ambiguous not because his intention for independence are ambiguous, just because of the political pressures and military pressures and the internal pressures from all sides in Taiwan Island. So on one hand, he has to continue his stance. As he said, he was and he is the worker for Taiwan's independence. But on the other hand, restrained by their basic law, which define the country as the China and define the geographic scope as the China. So he does not defy the basic law of Taiwan, and also he does not challenge fundamentally to the one China policy. So that is the basic reason for the ambiguous. But basically, his speech really sent the Taiwan's independence towards Taiwan's independence. That is the very serious development recently in Taiwan Islands. So basically, I think from now on, the relation across strait entered more uncertainties than before.
Joseph, what do you make of Lai Ching-te's speech over there, the so-called inauguration speech, and how do you think that will affect cross-strait relations and also great power dynamics?
Well, I agree with my colleague in the studio, but I think one of the things that if we're looking at it more positively, and I agree the ambiguity is troubling, and certainly the platform of the DPP is troubling, but he did commit to maintaining the status quo during the speech, and he avoided making calls for independence other than these ambiguous statements that his party's committed to. In fact, it's not surprising that he didn't go a step further, not only because he's legally constrained, but also because it would be political suicide to do that. Most Taiwanese and most in Washington are not ready for that kind of move. However, the status quo is not really the status quo. The U.S. has been eroding the principle of the one China policy and setting the table for a possible armed conflict with China over Taiwan, with some experts believing the template is Ukraine, in so much as the U.S. over the course of a decade provoked Russia into the war that's happening there now. But I think the problem for Taiwan presently is that for decades, its economic growth benefited from close relations with China, and now its leading industries are being restricted by U.S. policies from doing business with China at all. Furthermore, Taiwanese politicians long flirted with independence or perpetually maintaining separation, with the U.S. tacitly supporting but keeping things in check, allowing Taiwanese politicians, especially the DPP, to exploit that narrative and free ride on the issue. But now the task is that Taiwan appears increasingly weaponized by Washington, and Taiwan might therefore end up in a fight it doesn't really want and can't survive. And indeed, the lesson here is Ukraine. The U.S. hasn't won in Ukraine, and it won't, and it can't win in Taiwan. Furthermore, no one knows what the U.S. policy will be from one president to the next, so Lai can't count on a stable future. Now, this is terrible for Taiwan. It's terrible for security in the economy, and it's terrible for investors, especially those who are looking to build long-term growth positions in the Taiwanese economy.
Joseph, as much as I love my American friends, where I lived for many years, great people, including yourself. But, once I went to a university in New York, and some students over there couldn't even distinguish Taiwan versus Thailand. But on the strategic level, along the Beltway, the strategists and the policy elites know only too well the issue of Taiwan, the origin, the history of it. And people say that the Washington has been using Taiwan, like you alluded to, as an unsinkable aircraft carrier to contain China. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think it's clear that, that Washington has a multi-tiered, broad strategy aiming at containing and knocking back China, or possibly trying to push China into the middle income trap, whatever. There are a lot of different things that are underway. And clearly, Taiwan is a key component of that. And certainly Taiwan industries and Taiwan people have felt that bite, and certainly it's created anxiety in China. But I think one of the problems that we have is that unfortunately, whether or not Taiwan is the most likely point of some sort of U.S. provocation, it's become this issue that the U.S. can perpetually leverage against the mainland and even against the Taiwanese people, in so much as the Taiwan political system has now experienced elite capture, and Taiwan finds itself in a security trap. So I keep hoping that we could find a way to take away that point of leverage, to simply say we don't care what you do, but nevertheless, my broader concern is that that in some way Taiwan might be distracting us from the bigger picture, which is a massive campaign against the mainland.
Yeah. Professor Yang, people talk about maintaining status quo. Lai Ching-te talk about maintaining the so-called status quo, but actually he has been seeking a cultural secessionism and spiritual secessionism also, although stopping short, like you said, stopping short at constitutional secessionism, one thing he dared not do. But which is more dangerous?
Well, I think the most dangerous point is the Taiwan authorities, especially suspicions that under Lai Ching-te's administration, the space of the changing the status quo will be faster than before. Let's return.
In what terms?
Yeah, okay. Let's return to the so-called status quo. So how to define the status quo? I think 2 points. Firstly, legally speaking and geographically speaking, both PRC's constitution and Taiwan's basic law defines the country as the same. That is the China, both geographically and legally speaking. So that is the legal status quo. Say, in the world, there's only one China. Both sides across the strait define the country as the one. That is one China. And also, international legally speaking, Taiwan has been restored to China in 1945 based on the treaty between 9 allied states, including China and the U.S. and others, and the Japanese government. The Japanese surrender treaty, that's a 10 states multilateral treaty that legally and officially declared Japan restored Taiwan to China.
Yes.
And also based on the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation, and also by the series of documents and resolutions by UNIC and UN Congress. So both the international law and the domestic law, both of the sides across strait, In the case, clearly, there's only one China. Both Taiwan Islands, Mazu, Jinmen, Penghu, and Taiwan, and the mainland belong to China. That is one point of status quo. And the secondly, both U.S. and China, for a long time, insist on there's only one China. Even today, U.S. administration also say they can only maintain the unofficial ties with Taiwan simply because Taiwan is a part of China.
But Professor Yang, Washington has been paying lip service to this so-called one China policy. Well, we insisted on them as a one China principle, one thing that Washington never abide by. If you look at the 6 assurances issued by Ronald Reagan, the weapon sales, Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island, they're, basically playing good cop, bad cop.
That is what I want to stress, to say the status quo is one like this, but the action by U.S. and the Taiwan authorities is the other. And the U.S. repeatedly say they oppose any unilateral action changing the status quo. But in fact, it is not United States. It is PPT in Taiwan that has been taking unilateral actions to change the status quo in gradual way. That is very dangerous. So I think if U.S. and the Taiwan authorities really want to maintain the peace and stabilities, the simple way, very simple way is stop changing the status quo and maintain the real status quo I mentioned above, especially based on the domestic law and the international law. Without that status quo, I think the situation in Taiwan, across Taiwan Strait, will develop towards more and more dangerous direction.
Yeah, of course, during the so-called inauguration speech of the new leader of Taiwan, Lai Ching-te, there's no mentioning of one China, there's no mentioning of 1992 consensus, there's no owning up to the fact that the DPP or the Kuomintang is in fact a dissident minority regime existing on the island of Taiwan. Joseph, what do you make of the future of cross-strait relations, in terms of economic and trade ties, if you think about it, which is substantial between the mainland and Taiwan, and also between the island of Taiwan and Washington?
Well, I'm really quite a bit of a pessimist. I'm really very deeply concerned about what I see as the Cold War, the new Cold War that the United States is advancing against China. Before the conflict in Ukraine began, most Ukrainians couldn't fathom it actually happening. But when I was there last summer, all the people I spoke with acknowledged that Ukraine had allowed itself to be drawn into a proxy conflict between the U.S. and Russia, and that this wasn't a one-sided aggression, contrary, to depictions by Kiev in the West. They acknowledged that they also bore responsibility for this fate and the horrors that befell them. Now, I think people often fail to take responsibility before the fighting starts and thereby allow larger forces that don't actually care about their well-being to take control. And I don't think anyone on either side of the strait wants to experience the destruction of Ukraine or Gaza. They don't want to see Chinese children on either side of the Taiwan Strait burning in the street. But this is the sort of consequence that people must envision and take responsibility for, to above all acknowledge that it is grossly and gravely wrong to pursue policies that can kill people, anyone, especially civilians. Now, there are larger forces at work in Washington that do envision an eventual conflict, and it will be up to the people in Taiwan to resist this path, to resist being used as a tool of American hegemony and imperialism.
Professor Yang, we have about 45 seconds left. For the future of cross-strait relations, what are your hopes and wishes?
Well, I think Taiwan, across Taiwan Strait relation is at a crossroad. If Taiwan authorities return to the 92 consensus, then the relation between the two sides will be very bright and hopeful. Otherwise, will be dangerous.
And then do you think the KMT delegation's frequent visits to Beijing would help in any way in swaying the public opinion on the islands?
Yes, I think the complex of the relation between the two sides need to multiple and all-dimensional efforts, including the efforts you mentioned.
Professor Yang Xiyu and Joseph, thank you both so very much.